For a while on my Patreon page, I was trying to do a bonus episode once a month. I may start doing that again, but I just end up wanting to share the episodes so everyone could hear them. Way back in March of 2020, Wendy Hembrock from Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV and Small Council Matters podcast joined me and to share her all-female Mount Rushmore of rock and roll. So here's that bonus episode for everyone to enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Patreon-only episode of Set Listing Bruce. That's right, you guys get top secret audio, and today we have a wonderful one. One of my favorite podcasters and one of my favorite people, Wendy Hembrock, is here. Wendy, how are you doing?
Hi, Jesse. I'm doing great.
Good. So, Wendy, in case someone has not listened to you on the regular show, tell us a little about yourself.
I am a podcaster, which is how I know Jesse. I am one of the co-hosts of Tuning Into Sci-Fi Television podcast, which is a show where every week we talk about genre television that's currently on that we think you should watch now, watch soon, let sit on your DVR, or maybe skip. We have a lot of fun geeking out about some of our favorite shows. And
Yeah.
we are at Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV.
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts. The banter and the camaraderie you guys have, it really does feel like you're just in a room with a bunch of friends, gabbing about the latest, whether it's Supernatural or, Star Trek Picard or, and and then it's always funny that between the three of you, the shows that like only one of you may be watching because there's so much to watch now, right? And so the whole perspective of, are we going to stick with this or not, right?
Well, we've had an evolution. So we've been doing the show for over 11 years. And we used to have a rule where we would try a show out. If it was a network show that it would have like 22 episodes, we'd say, well, let's give it 5 before we decide.
Yeah.
And now in the age of streaming, a lot of them, you get 2 maybe.
Yes.
And then, you got a fish or cut bait.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, and I actually think that was one of the first, one of the things they do, and I've kind of, when I was doing my Springsteen Thought of the Day was a blatant copy of they do a tuner minute, and they kind of do a 1-minute commentary just to think to question to ask or guessing for feedback from the audience. And I think either one of them, the question was or a response to, and the reality was you have to accept the fact that there may be good TV or good books or good comics you're just not going to get to.
Oh yeah, there absolutely are now. There's tons of great shows that I either just am not going to pay for it because it's on a pay channel that there isn't enough other content for me to want to watch and pay for, or I'm going to wait for it to come to streaming and binge it all down the road because maybe it was a show that only got 2 or 3 seasons, so it's like, oh, I'll save that for one long weekend.
Yeah,
sometime down the road.
Well, in Wendy's other persona, she is a massive Pearl Jam fan. And how long have you been with a big fan of the band?
So I've always liked Pearl Jam from their very first album, 10. I used to have a 30-minute drive back and forth to work, and I had both 10 and Versus on cassettes, right? Back when we had cassettes that
Yes.
I would play in the car. And 10, I could play side A on the drive to work and side B on the drive home, which I did for like a whole year straight. But I had never had the opportunity to see the band play live until 1998, and that's when I became a super fan, where, I wanted to be a hardcore girl who saw them play as much as possible in as many different places as possible, and very much got involved with online fandom and being part of that culture as well. So quite
Yeah.
a while now.
Yeah, I love that story because I often say that I think there's two kinds of people. There's the people that go to their first Bruce Springsteen concert and go, "Wow, that was long," and and the other ones that go, "Oh my goodness, I want to go every time I get a chance to see him perform, to do that." So I think it's interesting that you had a similar experience, that as much as a fan of the music was, seeing them perform live kind of took you to a different level.
Yeah, and I mean, I've definitely had that experience with Bruce also. Because I always think of Bruce shows as like going to revival
Yes.
meeting. And I think he's even said something like that. It's like there
Yeah.
has to be, that elevating experience happening for people.
Absolutely.
The thing for me was hearing Eddie Vedder's voice,
Hmm.
and also hearing him sing a song that I didn't really, because it wasn't a radio hit.
Hmm.
But when I heard him sing it and I heard the crowd respond to it, I was like, oh, I guess I'm not the only one who really likes that one.
Yeah.
Um, you have those kind of moments
Sure.
too.
Yeah, it is. So, I kind of reached out to Wendy and we exchanged a few emails, and I told her that we've had a couple people. We had a full episode on the regular feed about Mount Rushmore of rock, and we gave the premise of you could pick four solo artists and four groups, and who would you put? And we had a really good discussion of Dr. Scott and I about it, and we got a lot of different listeners gave it. And so I said, since Wendy um, wasn't involved in that voice, I thought it would be a kind of fun way for her to, just give us a little extra. So I think you've done your homework, Wendy. Do you want to share a little bit? Do you want to start with groups or solo?
I'm going to start with individuals,
Okay,
and
so
I specifically kind of disregarded the criteria you gave me.
absolutely perfect.
Um,
So I love that. I want you to, yeah, like give me a name, or first off, how did you go about picking what you thought should belong on that?
well, so first and foremost, I wanted them to all be women, because
Yay.
women are not highlighted enough for their contributions to the arts in general and music in particular. Um, so that was my criteria, was I want these to be the individuals to be women. And I really thought about first just women artists that mean something to me, that spoke to me, but also have had an impact on other people. And if they had any connection whatsoever to Pearl Jam or Bruce, that was definitely also a consideration,
Yes.
but not really a primary one. So, and I also thought about whether they were really rock and roll or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried to focus on mostly rock, but one of them I think you
Yeah.
will argue is not a rock
So
musician, but it's okay.
my buddy Sam, who I no longer work with, but we remain close friends. We try to go to lunch every week. Um, he has problems with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, partly because he's a Leon Helm fan versus a Robbie Robertson fan. And so since
Oh.
Robertson was involved with the Hall of Fame, he therefore, thinks it's crap. Um, but he also said, does Whitney Houston belong in a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Does Aretha Franklin? And, my point is it's kind of a pop culture combination, soul, rock and roll. It's all kind of mixed together. So I could imagine, I'm just guessing, you might have had some of those concerns about, well, is this person quote unquote rock enough, or are they more of another genre?
Well, I mean, I'll just say I gave a broad swag to the
Good.
definition of rock and roll, and
Good.
one person is definitely not a rock
All right.
musician, but it is so influential as a singer that they can't be overlooked if we're talking about Mount Rushmore and not
Absolutely.
the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
All right. So I love this. Oh, so give me your first choice.
Okay, so I guess I'll start with that one then. Give me 1 second because I have to scroll through my notes a little bit. So I'll start with the one who is furthest afield, and you actually even named her, which is Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think first of all, she has had an amazing voice, but she also changed the way that female singers presented music. Her reimagining of respect was not only about Black consciousness, but it was about female power too.
Yes.
And that became a mainstream song, and she, I think, just opened a door for a lot of other people, female singers, to, bring their full-throated voice. And there's certainly people before her, but I didn't listen to Bessie Smith, and I didn't listen to those people. I listened to Aretha Franklin as a kid. So for me, she belongs there, but for sure. And also because what she sang about was her, or at least my imagining of her real experience. She wasn't singing about theoretical things.
Right.
This was, there's a lot of just realism and truth in the way she sang.
When I made my list, I ended up debating on if I should leave someone off to include a female musician, so I ended up going Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Bob Dylan, but I had in parentheses either Linda Ronstadt or Aretha Franklin, and then after, as I said, Carole King could have been another choice. That I didn't know which of those four I should leave off to include one of the other people. So I love that you're doing from this perspective, because they are significant and they are a major influence, and they don't get enough respect.
Well, I'll jump to my next one because you already mentioned her, which is Carole King.
Good.
And specifically Tapestry, which is an album that came out in 1971. So I was 7 years old at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's actually her songbook. My sister had her guitar songbook, but I was learning to play the piano. So I would play the songs in the guitar songbook on the piano. So her music was like one of the first music I learned to play. We also had her album, my sister did, and she let me play it all the time. And I loved her voice. To me, she just kind of epitomizes the early 70s before Watergate.
Yes.
And when I look at that album cover now, I'm like, oh, well, the other reason why I like Carole King was she was just presenting herself. It's the photograph of her on that album is her sitting in a window, and then there's this cat that's kind of also looking at the camera. It's very, earthy 70s kind of photo, which is very much what that album is. But she's an amazing composer and writer, just fantastic. So and she had to come on the list for me because she very much was of a time when I was figuring out my own identity as a person, and also sort of identifying, women as role models. And this is not a person who is objectified. She's just herself.
I love this choice. And the other thing that reminds me is you'll often see people on the internet or Twitter will go, name an album that is you can listen to, straight through, and there isn't a bad song on it. And, different people will mention different albums. And like my go-to will go Pet Sounds, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. But, I just I pulled up the track list of Tapestry.
Yeah, it's just one after another.
It is one after another. And, and I think they don't, and I think it's partly because she's a woman, right? She doesn't get that recognition. But, in the 72 Grammys, she dominated.
Yeah. And I mean, she's very influential.
Yes.
That album influenced a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So that was the other reason. So she means something to me, and I think her work has definitely had
great
value.
Choice. Who's
so now I'm gonna switch now to straight up rock and roll, but beyond that, which is Joan Jett.
Yes.
Right. So Joan Jett started with the Runaways. I didn't know her at the time. I guess I kind of vaguely heard Cherry Bomb, but I always think of her as I Love Rock and Roll in the early 80s, which I was in high school at that time. So it was very resonant for me that it's just a classic sort of, that's a cover. She did not write that song that she recorded with the Blackhearts, but she made it her own for sure. And she's just like a firecracker. And what I didn't know until recently about Joan Jett was how much influence she had on the Riot Girl movement and music in the 90s. She actually produced the album that was released by the Germs, who are a band that Pat Smear was in. Pat Smear was later in Nirvana and the Foo Fighters. She also produced Bikini Kill's album. They are the Riot Girl band. And she also worked with the Gits, who were a punk band from Seattle. And they unfortunately lost their singer. She was murdered. But Joan Jett, I did not know this until there was a movie about her recently that I saw last year, that she was heavily involved in inspiring all these people, which was really resonated with me because this was all happening around the same time that Pearl Jam was forming and that a lot of the Seattle music was popping at the time. So that also was new information about how much she had influenced other people, other musicians in particular.
Yeah. Obviously growing up, I remember that the I Love Rock and Roll and the video, she played in Beaumont, Texas. It was a double bill, her and the Beach Boys. And it was a lot of fun. And then for all our Springsteen fans, I'm sure the first thing they think of is Light of Day, the song that Bruce wrote for her that she did in the movie with Michael J. Fox. So great choice. I think she is definitely, an icon and an influence on future female musicians and male musicians. So, great choice. Who's next?
And number 4 is Patti Smith, who co-wrote a song with Bruce, right?
Yes.
Because the Night, which is on one of her most famous albums. The main reason I chose Patti Smith, though, so yes, there's that connection, but I actually think of her because she wrote one of my favorite songs, which is People Have the Power, which is a song I learned of from Pearl Jam because they've covered that song several times. One of the best versions was at a show I attended in Buffalo in 2003. And Pearl Jam's covered other Patti Smith songs as well, especially Dancing Barefoot, which is another Patti Smith song I really love. The thing about Patti Smith is she's a poet at heart. She's a great songwriter. People Have the Power is now it's kind of like become a modern protest song. I had the opportunity to see her at a show that was a benefit for Tibet House in New York City in 2002. And I went to that show because David Bowie was going to play at Carnegie Hall. But she was there too, and I didn't know it until I went to the show, but it was kind of a tradition that she would close this benefit. Adam Yauch from the Beastie Boys is also one of the people that runs this benefit, or he was at the time. So at the very end, they brought everyone on stage and they sang People Have the Power, which if you don't know that song, go and Google it right now. It's very inspiring. But the thing about Patti Smith is she has a huge impact on a lot of musicians. Her album Horses is kind of well known, I think, but she's not known because to have an amazing voice. She's not known because she's beautiful. She's not known because of any stage theatrics or a complicated setup or anything like that. She's really just known for her words, and the people that cite her as an influence. Michael Stipe from REM, very vocal in talking about how he was influenced by her, but also Johnny Marr from the Smiths. The Smiths was a band I loved in college, and a lot of the people that she inspired didn't adopt her style or anything like that, but they found in her the ability to tap into their own singularity and be themselves, be their true selves. So that is the thing I really appreciate about Patti Smith, and why I think we'll be singing some of her songs for a long time.
I think that's a great choice. I guess maybe a couple months ago, Penn Jillette was talking that before he was married, he spent time with Deborah Harry from Blondie. And before he met her, he said, I'm a Patti Smith person. I'm not a Blondie person. Patti Smith is the rock and roll singer I want. I want her power. I want her energy. I want her charisma. I wasn't into Blondie. He said, and then when I ended up meeting Deborah Harry, she was more like Patti Smith than I would have thought. And I think that is, Bruce always talks about when he did the Music Cares, they were doing the tribute to him. He talked about that, Patti, they gave the song to her and she changed the lyrics enough to make it where it really worked. and so he always talks about it's their song. So yeah, I think great choice, great choice.
Yeah, she told a great story about how I think his name's Johnny Iovine.
Yes,
Iovine.
yes.
I'm not going to pronounce his name correctly, but so he was producing her and he was producing Bruce at the same time, and he was really the one who kept on hammering her, like, "Have you listened to that Bruce tape yet? You know, are you going to get around to it?" And she was not doing it, and it was actually tied to this routine she had with the who was going to become her husband, where he would call every night at like 6:30 or so. And one night, for whatever reason, he didn't call, and she was really anxious about it. And that's when she finally listened to the song, and then she funneled all of this, love that she had, and this whole angst about waiting for waiting to talk to this person into that song, and it just kind of flowed out of her. So that's the other thing I like about that song in particular is it's really inspired by love, and it really was an interesting collaboration.
It really was. It was. All right. Well, man, that's a great 4. Did you have any honorable mentions?
I do. I have several honorable
That's okay.
mentions.
Go for
So here are my honorable mentions. Joni Mitchell,
it. Yes.
Stevie Nicks,
Yes.
Dolly Parton,
Yes.
Madonna,
Yeah.
Annie Lennox,
Oh, yeah.
and Loretta Lynn.
Very nice. Very nice. Those are all great choices. And a diversity. You continue to show the diversity. And I think if people don't understand, I don't know if you ended up watching Ken Burns' country music documentary, but he covered the breadth and the beauty of country music and how Loretta Lynn and Dolly Parton, they are wonderful songwriters and wonderful performers, and such an influence to a whole nother generation of music makers.
They are. I mean, I had known that about Dolly Parton before I watched that Ken Burns thing. Loretta Lynn, I did not know as much about her music until I watched that. And I also didn't know that much about Merle Haggard or Chris Christopherson
Yeah.
until I watched that. I knew about Hank Williams. Stone Gossard, who's the rhythm guitar player for Pearl Jam, often talks about Hank Williams. So I knew he had a lot of influence on a lot of guitar players and musicians. But yeah, and I mean, so actually, are we going to do bands?
Yes.
Okay, so bands, I did not impose the same restriction on myself, other than, and I did not do this as like my favorite bands or anything like that. I really, well, I'll explain, but
No.
So I'll start with the one who I think is a person who has to be acknowledged for being the source of so much rock music that came, even though he was a blues player, which is Robert Johnson.
Okay.
So Robert Johnson is the one who people always tell the story. You know, he went down to the crossroads and sold his soul to the devil. But without Robert Johnson, you know, we don't have Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan and, you know, pretty much every band out of the
I agree. Yeah.
Fish Invasion, the Rolling Stones. I love blues. I was fortunate to have been introduced to the blues when I was in college. I almost put Sam and Dave in here instead of Robert Johnson, but I really felt like because of Eric Clapton and the Rolling Stones, I was like, it has to be Robert Johnson.
Yeah, great choice.
So I don't know if he counts as a band, but I'm gonna dodge that.
All right, that's okay. Yeah.
So similar to my selection of Carole King for the individuals because it was tied to sort of growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I chose Neil Young and Crazy Horse.
Oh, nice.
And I didn't choose the more obvious Bob Dylan because that's been done. So
Sure.
I wanted
No,
to
I
shine a
agree.
light on Neil Young because he again is another person who really brings a particular, unique method approach
Yes.
to everything that he does. He's constantly reinventing. If he weren't a musician, I always think Neil Young would be an inventor
Right.
because he seems to be on that path every time you hear him play. I love hearing him play guitar.
Yes.
I have to caveat that with Crazy Horse.
Right.
I really do like that combination. Um,
And the
and
connection, Niels
there's
Lofgren, very active, with Neil Young for a lot
yeah,
of his years.
yeah. Also Pearl Jam connection because Neil was instrumental in kind of keeping Pearl Jam together.
Oh, really?
Yes. So back in the mid 90s when things were really bad for Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder in particular. This was at the time in which fandom was toxic, and he was getting just too much media attention, too much focus on him as a person. He had a fan who loved him so much, decided they needed to drive their car through his house and try to kill his wife. That kind of really bad
Okay.
stuff. So the band kind of went on a break, and the rest of the band was feeling like maybe they were getting left behind.
Sure.
So Neil actually went on tour with the rest of Pearl Jam, and they recorded an album called Mirror Ball, and they were supposed to record an album with Ed as Pearl Jam, so it would have been Neil Young with Pearl Jam instead of Pearl Jam with Neil. But it ended up only being 2 songs that they did, which was called Merkin Ball. But he was really instrumental in having all the members of the band recognize what they were capable of, and it's one of the reasons why they play Rockin' in the Free World as a very frequent cover, which is one of my favorite
Sure.
songs too. But one of my other favorite Neil Young songs is just this wonderful little ballad, Harvest Moon.
Yes.
And Cinnamon Girl. I mean, he's just written some really wonderful songs that are pure rock songs.
Yes. One of the things that you make me think of is over the past couple of summers, Steven Van Zandt, Little Steven, has toured a lot. He's done a couple of solo albums, and when he's doing press, he's talked to people and has said that he really regrets leaving the E Street Band right after Born in the USA happened, because he was off on his own. He wanted to do his own solo stuff, and he said it was just it was a mistake, not just financially. He thinks creatively, and he says he tells bands nowadays you can have it all. You can go do individual solo material, you can go stretch your wing creatively, but keep the band there. Keep the band back together, because there will be a time when you want to go play music with your friends again. And you will want that. And he said that, the time apart made the E Street stronger. And you can hear in the interviews, Wendy, the pain he feels of that if he and Bruce and the other band members, and Bruce is the one who made the decision, obviously, but if they could do it over again, they would have tried this a different way. So I think that's great that Neil Young kind of helped them work through that process to keep them together.
Yeah, and I mean Neil is absolutely a person who's broken things up and putting them back together,
exactly.
and constantly experimenting. But that did also happen with Pearl Jam in terms of um, there's a funny, it's in the 20th anniversary documentary where so Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament were the founders of Pearl Jam, right? They came from another band that their singer tragically died of a heroin overdose, called Mother Love Bone. So they kind of knew that they were going to make another band somehow.
Right.
So in any case, in the beginning, they were in charge of the band. They were like running and driving things. But in the meantime, you have Eddie Vedder as your lead singer, right? And he's a songwriter, and he's a person who is, he's the focal point because he's the lead singer. He's also growing as a musician, and Stone makes a very funny comment about me and Jeff were arguing over the scraps when we didn't even realize that Ed had like completely taken over the band.
Right.
And so they had to go through a process of sort of everybody figuring out their role and their influence and recalibrating to that. And then they all started doing their own side projects, and they have often talked about how, as fans of The Who and the Beatles and other bands, they were always really disappointed when they broke up. They didn't want Pearl Jam to break up. So they made a concerted effort. Everybody has side projects within Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
And they're very supportive of those side projects. And the thought is, whatever you bring back is going to be, more interesting and better for whatever the band works on, separate from people's individual side gigs.
Very cool.
Okay.
All right.
So now,
yes.
Next is Prince.
Okay.
And the Revolution.
Nice.
And for me, Prince is the real deal. So he definitely stands on the shoulders of people before him as far as funk. But to me, he transformed funk and soul and pop and rock, all of them. I just love how he's very playful and flirty, I guess would be the right word to use, in everything he talks about as far as exploring sex,
yes,
and talking about sex in a very open way, and in a celebratory way. It's not a domineering way. He's just funky.
Yeah.
and one of the most phenomenal guitar players ever.
Absolutely.
So I just, Prince means a lot to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah.
And then my number one is the Beatles. The Beatles are kind of the band that was like the soundtrack of my childhood, I think.
Yeah.
And really kind of what I imprinted on as, oh, well, this is what rock music is supposed to sound like.
Yes.
So for me, they definitely have to be there.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting in Bruce's autobiography, he talks about that when he saw Elvis, the world changed, but when he saw the Beatles, he wanted to be a Beatle. And I think the influence they have in just so many ways is, you can't count it. And then when you talk about just strip away, and I think Yesterday, that film, whether you like the film or not, shows the magic of those songs and how, if people had never heard them, how they would be just amazed by them. And so, yeah, I think no one's going to argue with that choice, and it's true. And there's a reason why it's a cliche. Well, of course you got to pick the Beatles. Well, yeah, because they're the Beatles. So absolutely. Great
Yeah.
choices.
So I'd be curious to hear if people have
Yeah.
thoughts about, oh my God, those are the worst
No,
choices
no, no.
ever.
No, I want you to do that. That'd be great.
And I would definitely encourage people, if you are not familiar with any of these artists, to go
Yes.
out and seek them out.
Oh, absolutely. Wendy, this is so much fun. I appreciate you so much. I'm gonna have you on again, maybe when um, we get past this virus and you do get tickets for the next Pearl Jam show. We can talk about it, and that'll be good. If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
Well, they can hear me on Tuning into Sci-Fi TV podcast, which is on where any format that you get your favorite podcasts. I'm also on Twitter at Wendy Hembrock.
All right, and guys, you know how to find me. So we appreciate this. This is Wendy. I appreciate you sparing some time. We're going to end with, because I did not know this song and I Googled it, and I think in today's environment, this song is more important than ever. The power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools. It's decreed the people rule. It's decreed the people rule. I believe everything we dream can come to pass through our union. We can turn the world around. We can turn the earth's revolution. We have the power. People have the power. Thank you, Wendy, for sharing that. And thank you,
Thank you,
listeners.
Jesse.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.